Hey everyone, Mr. Voikin here, and we're going to take a look at lesson 3, which is finding the midpoint of a line segment. And we're going to start off with a horizontal line. So you can see we have a line segment, point A to point B, and they're saying what is the midpoint? Well, it looks pretty obvious. It's right there. Okay, so we need to find the coordinates of that. So basically what we're trying to find out is what is the x and y value of that point. Well, again, we can see this here because it's given to us on a Cartesian coordinate. So when I look at it, it's over 5 in the x and up 3 in the y. But what about applying a mathematical formula so that we can figure this out? Well, the mathematical formula is right here, which is the midpoint is equal to x1 plus x2 divided by 2. Now that determines the x coordinate of the midpoint, and then y1 plus y2 divided by 2 is going to give you the y coordinate of the midpoint. So if we go back to our example, obviously we need to find out the coordinates of points A and B, and then label them as 1s and 2s, and then substitute that into the formula. So let's do that. We'll look up here and we'll start with point A, which is going to be 1 in the x and 3 in the y, and point B is going to be 9 in the x and 3 in the y. Now remember that formula, the midpoint is going to be x1 plus x2 divided by 2 to get the x midpoint, and y1 plus, that is a 1, y2 divided by 2. So let's just take those values and substitute them in there. So the midpoint is going to equal, well, x1, we haven't labeled them yet, so just choose one to be 0.1 and the other one to be 0.2. So x, y, and I'll call those both 1s, x, y, and those will both be 2s. So in this case, the x1 is going to be 1 plus x2, which is 9 divided by 2. So again, if I look at 1 plus 9, that's 10 divided by 2 is 5, and that's what we got right there as our midpoint. So what about the y? Well, I want to use this, make sure I've got x1 and y1 in the same ordered pairs there, and the y1 is going to be 3 plus your y2, which is 3 divided by 2, and 3 plus 3 is 6 divided by 2 is 3, and there we go. We've just used the formula to calculate the same midpoint of that horizontal line segment. So we would do the same thing for a vertical line segment. You would first label the 2 points and apply them to the formula. So moving down to this third one, now we have a diagonal line, so it's not horizontal, it's not vertical, it is going on an angle. And basically, if I was to say there's point F and there's point E, and if I was to look at it, that's around the midpoint right there. So what are the coordinates of this midpoint that I've just visually placed? It's going to be -4 in the x, and 1, 2, 3 in the y. So we're going to apply this to the formula by, first of all, figuring out the coordinates of point E, which is going to be 2 in the x and 7 in the y, and the coordinates for point F, which is going to be -10 in the x and -1 in the y, and then I just need to make one of them xy1, y1, and the other one x2, y2. Then apply that to our formula. So the midpoint is going to be x1, which is 2, plus x2, which is plus -10, and divide by 2. The y is going to be y1, which is 7, plus -1, and I will divide by 2. So when we do the math right here, we can see that 2 plus negative 10 is going to be negative 8, and negative 8 divided by 2 is going to be negative 4, which is exactly what we got right there. And let's see if it works out true for the y point. So when we look at the y, it's going to be 7 plus negative 1, which is going to be a positive 6, and a positive 6 divided by 2 gives us 3. And yes, that worked out. We have the right x, y values for that midpoint. So it's important that you become familiar with how to use the midpoint formula. Quite often we're not going to be given a Cartesian coordinate with a line where we're going to be figuring out the points, or we're just going to be given a pair of a set of ordered pairs like this. So let's take a look at example, class example 1a. So I have 2 points, P and Q, and again, it doesn't matter which one becomes x1, y1, as long as the other one is x2 and y2, and then we just apply that to our formula again. So the midpoint is going to be over 2, and it's going to be x1, which happens to be 4, plus x2, which is 12, and y1 is 7, and y2 is 3. Now, once I do the math, which is fairly simple in this case, for the x point, it's going to be 4 plus 12, 16 divided by 2 is 8, and 7 plus 3, 10 divided by 2 is 5. So the midpoint of line segment PQ is going to be 8, 5. Okay, now what about the second example, B? Well, it's exactly the same. Basically, all they're doing is adding in negative values. Makes it a little bit more complicated, but at this point, the negatives, adding and subtracting positive and negative integers shouldn't be a problem for you. So we're just going to label this again as x1, y1, x2, y2. And we're going to apply that to our formula right here. And we're going to get x1, which is negative 5, plus x2, which is plus negative 11. y1 is going to be 7, plus negative 2 for y2. Okay, now if we do the math up top, I'm probably going to do this one and just adding one more step here for you. We're going to get negative 5 plus negative 11 is negative 16 divided by 2, and we're going to get 7 plus negative 2, which is going to be 5 divided by 2. Now, at this point, we want to look to simplify things. So you can see that in the first point, which is the x, midpoint, negative 16 divided by 2 can be simplified to negative 8. And 5 divided by 2 cannot be simplified, so we would leave that as 5 divided by 2. Now, depending on the question and how they're asking you to represent these values, it can be left as an improper fraction here, but it could also be written as negative 8, comma, and 2 and 1/2, and it could also be negative 8 and 2.5. All right, so let's take a look at the third example. And the third example, they're basically adding in some variables, but it's going to be the exact same thing. So to figure out the midpoint, it's just going to be the x and y values. So there's the commas right there. So to the left would be x1 and then y1 and x2 and y2. So I'm just going to move this down to give myself a little bit of space right there. Now if we look at x1, it happens to be w plus 3, and we're going to add to that x2. So I'm going to add 5w minus 1. And for the y points, it's going to be 2w, which is y1, plus 7w plus 1. Okay, now it may help you to put these into brackets, but it's not absolutely necessary. Okay, so let's take a look at what we have here. I'm just going to simplify, and up top we got w plus 5w giving us 6w, and 3 and negative 1, which is going to be a positive 2, so plus 2. And on the y midpoint, we've got 2 w's and 7 w's. So I can cross those out, giving us 9 w's, and the only thing we have left, the only constant left, is a plus 1. So now again, just like we did in example B, we want to try and simplify things, but remember that this 2 now has to be able to divide into both of those, and same with this 2 has to divide into both of those. So when we look at the x point, 6w divided by 2 is going to give us 3w. And the constant, which is 2 divided by 2, is going to give me a 1. So the x midpoint is going to be 3w plus 1. Now what about the y midpoint? Well, now we've basically got 9 divided by 2, which is going to give us 4 over 5. 4.5, and 1 over 2 is also the same as 0.5. So it depended on how, again, the question is asking you to represent these. So in this case, 9 divided by 2, if I was going to leave it in fractional form, oops, that should be a 2. It's 9 over 2 w's plus 1 over 2. Okay, now with this one right here, again, depending on your teacher or the question or how they've represented the answers, this could also be is put as a midpoint of 3w plus 1. Now we'd leave that as is, but because this one right here shares a common denominator, you might also see it written like this, 9w plus 1 divided by 2. They might just leave it like that as well. All right, well, let's take a look at class example 2. So we're going to throw a word problem at you, because why not? Hard to really see what's going on there. It looks like we've got a lake, and with 2 points on it, we're trying to find the midpoint or something. Not sure. Nope. Apparently Max, Ruby's brother, wrote on her paper, and now Ruby's so upset because she doesn't know these other coordinates, so she needs to figure them out. Poor Ruby. Okay, so on the previous questions, we always gave you the x and y1 and the x and y2, and then you were to calculate the midpoint. But in this case, we're asking you to calculate 2 points. One of them is the x midpoint, and the other one happens to be the y1. Okay, so you can see right here, this would be x1, and the y1, which is right there, is missing. We have the x2 and the y2, and down here we're missing the x midpoint, but we're given the y midpoint right there. Now on the formula, if you think back to it and just think logically, basically we have the midpoint, which is going to be the x midpoint, comma, y midpoint. That will equal, well, the x1 plus y1 divided by 2, and the x2 plus y2. Doing that all wrong, aren't I? Go backwards. The x1 plus the x2 divided by 2, and the y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Now, one thing you can do with this formula is you can break it up. Just consider the x to be one formula and the y to be the other formula. So essentially what I can do is say the x midpoint is equal to that, and the y midpoint is equal to that. Okay, so I can write this out as the x midpoint is going to be x1 plus x2 divided by 2, and the y midpoint is going to be y1 plus y2 divided by 2. And then once we calculate everything, we can put it together in a ordered set. Okay, so let's deal with the x first, and we've already labeled everything up here, but let's now take these values and substitute it into that formula right there. Okay, so xm, the x midpoint, which is going to be right here, and where is it right there? It's unknown. So we would just write that down as xm equals. Well, now we want to find the x1 and add it to x2 divided by 2. Well, x1 is right here, which is 5, and x2 is right there, which is negative 11. So again, I'm just going to substitute those values in. So the x midpoint equals 5 plus negative 11 divided by 2. When we do the math, that's going to be 5 plus negative 11 is negative 6 divided by 2, which is negative 3. So negative 3 is the x midpoint. Now what about the y midpoint right here? Well, the y midpoint is right here, which we can see is negative 6. So they give us that value already. So I will substitute that in for the y midpoint. It's going to equal y1 plus y2. y1 is unknown and y2 is negative 10. So again, it's going to be y1 plus negative 10 divided by 2. So this one's a little bit more complex because I have a denominator of 2, and that's the first thing I want to do is get rid of that 2. So we're just going back to basic algebra skills. So in order to get rid of that denominator, what I want to do is just put brackets around this and multiply everything inside the brackets by 2. So by that common denominator. So first I'm going 2 times negative 6, which gives us a negative 12. Okay, and that is on the left side of the equal sign, and on the right side of the equal sign I've got y1 minus 10 over 2, and when I multiply that right there by 2, essentially what we're doing is just canceling out the denominator, because 2 divided by 2 is 1, which doesn't change anything. So essentially what we're left with now is a y1 minus 10, and the reason it's a minus 10 is because you got positive plus minus, which simplifies to a minus 10. Now I just want to add 10 to this side, add 10 to that side, with the goal of isolating that variable. Negative 10 plus 10 makes 0, so that's gone. And on the left side of this equal sign, well, on the right side we still have the y1, and on the left side we've got negative 12 plus 10, which is negative 2. So in this case, our y1 value is going to be negative 2. Okay, so hopefully that helps. And the assignment questions start on page 513 and go all the way through to right about there. 517, and the answers are on 518. So we'll see you in class and we'll work through these together.